All right, when it rains, it pours, right? You've got John McCain already saying, I told you so, in a way, saying that the Flynn resignation are really erupting over revelations of taped conversations he had with the ambassador to Russia. Well, we shouldn't be really surprised by any of this. Add it now with the drama of a Russian spy ship just off the U.S. East Coast, in international waters, I stress, but still a little bit weird because of what it's capable of doing. We've got U.S. Retired Marine Corps General and Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Central Command, Anthony Zinni. Commander, very good to have you. I think that was John McCain's way, as I said at the outset, sir, of I told you so, saying I told you so. Be careful with the Russians. Be careful what you're dealing with. What do you think of that?
Well, every president since the end of the Cold War has tried to improve relationships with Russia, and it's not worked out. In the end, the Russian leadership, especially Putin, has undermined those attempts. You know, we had the reset button. We had President Bush looking into his soul and seeing something that obviously wasn't there. I don't fault President Trump for trying to create a better relationship and reduce tensions. I think the best advice ought to be very careful with this. The trust has not been built up, and it's been demonstrated that it's not there.
You know, General, I don't want to get too sidetracked by the John McCain rift, but it's pretty pronounced. And obviously, the senator and former presidential candidate was just reelected in Arizona. He's good for 6 years. He feels bulletproof, as he should, after winning an election that many thought he might lose. He's not a fan of this president. This president, of course, said some tough things about the senator. How is this going to go? Because they could be at each other's throats for a while here.
Yes, and that's unfortunate. I think you know, you like to have the Senate and the Congress overall in line with our approaches on an international front and in line with our policies. I think there's a lot of doubt in Congress about whether our relationship with Russia can be improved, and I think a lot of concern that we may offer things or remove sanctions or do things that will, in the end, hurt us, that they'll take advantage of it, they'll violate any agreements, and it'll be tough to walk things back at that point.
How do we gauge the promising leader with whom we can work? I mean, you know this history far better than I, but when a Mikhail Gorbachev appears out of nowhere, I mean, it wasn't out of nowhere, I grant you, but that he looked like a promising figure. Ronald Reagan famously said, this is a guy I can work with. Obviously, presidents of both parties have said Vladimir Putin, not so much. But when do we seize on someone with whom a U.S. president of any party can say, we can make progress?
I think the key is, and I went through this when President Clinton was trying to improve relationships with Iran when President Khatami was elected, and it looked like he was a moderate, and you know, tensions were easing to a certain degree. We could see that when I was commander of Central Command.
But of course, a moderate over there is a nutcase by almost any other definition, right?
Yeah, well, but, you know, he didn't want, he was very cautious, President Clinton, and said, let's test this.
Right.
If you can remember back, we lifted the embargo on Persian carpets and pistachio nuts, sent wrestling teams over there. But, you know, I think the key is, what do you get in return? If you get, you know, if you use a measured, slow pace to show that you're willing to do things if the other side does things, if they are willing to do things that demonstrate that they want a better relationship, an improved relationship, fine. You could move at a pace that, you know, steadily leads you to where you want to be. If they do things that upset this apple cart, if, you know, a situation like in the Ukraine, their involvement in the Middle East and Syria in particular, if those kinds of things come about, then you have to have some means of ensuring there's a penalty and stepping back from that relationship.
Real quickly, what do you make of this Russian spy ship coincidentally just seen off the U.S. East Coast shore in international waters? I hear the Russians saying, you know, it's been there a while. I mean, you guys just discovered it, but the timing is weird. What do you think?
Well, nothing is done without a purpose, especially the Russians. And I think the purpose is there to send signals. You know, what that might be is we're still here. We're waiting to hear, you know, what this new relationship might be. But but it's to say we're a threat and we're still around. I think that's the purpose of doing things like this, buzzing our ships and doing other things that sort of raise tensions.
General, it's always a pleasure having you. Thank you, and thank you for your great service to this country.